The Passion of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Matthew. One of the 12, who's called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said,
"What will you give me if I betray him to you?"
They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying,
"Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?"
He said,
"Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'"
So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said,
"Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me."
And they became greatly distressed and began to say to him one after another. He answered,
"The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as is written of him, but woe to the one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born."
Judas, who betrayed him, said,
"Surely not I, Rabbi."
He replied,
"You have said so."
While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said,
"Take, eat. This is my body.
Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying,
Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom."
When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them,
"You will all become deserters because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee."
Peter said to him,
"Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you."
Jesus said to him,
"Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.
Peter said to him,
"Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you."
and so said all the disciples. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples,
Sit here while I go over there and pray."
He took with him Peter and 2 of the sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. And then he said to them,
"I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me."
And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed,
"My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want."
Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter,
"So could you not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak."
And again he went away for the second time and prayed,
"My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done."
Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them,
"Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand."
Now while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given him a sign, saying,
"The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him."
At once he came up to Jesus and said,
"Greetings, Rabbi."
and kissed him. Jesus said to him,
"Friend, do what you were here to do."
Then they came and laid hand on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly one of those with Jesus put his hand on a sword, drew it, and struck the sleeve of the high priest, cutting off his ear. And then Jesus said to him,
Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way?"
At that hour Jesus said to the crowds,
"Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled.
Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none. Though many false witnesses came forward, at last two came forward and said,
This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days.
The high priest stood up and said,
Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?
but Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him,
I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God.
Jesus said to him,
You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Then the high priest tore his clothes and said,
He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?
They answered,
He deserves death.
Then they spat in his face and struck him. Some slapped him, saying,
Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?
Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said,
You also were with Jesus the Galilean.
but he denied it before all of them, saying,
I do not know what you are talking about.
when he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders,
This man is with Jesus of Nazareth.
again he denied it with an oath.
I do not know the man.
After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, then he began to curse, and he swore an oath.
I do not know the man.
At that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said,
I have sinned by betraying innocent blood.
but they said,
What is that to us? See to it yourself.
throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said,
It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money.
after conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken throughout the prophet Jeremiah. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one of whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price. And they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him,
Are you the king of the Jews?
Jesus said,
You say so.
but when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him,
Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?
but he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them,
Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?
for he realized that it was out of jealousy they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him,
Had nothing to do with that innocent man. But today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him.
Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them,
Which of the two do you want me to release for you?
and they said,
Barabbas.
Pilate said to them,
Then what should I do with Jesus who is called the Messiah?
all of them said.
Let him be crucified.
Then he asked,
Why? What evil has he done?
but they shouted all the more.
Let him be crucified.
So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying,
I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves.
Then the people as a whole answered,
His blood be on us and on our children.
So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put on his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, he came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes amongst themselves by casting lots. And then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, This is the King of the Jews. Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying,
You who was to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross.
In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying,
He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of the Jews. Let him come down from the cross then, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, I am God's son.
The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice,
Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani.
that is,
My God, why have you forsaken me?
when some of the bystanders heard it, they said, At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from the top to the bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tomb and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and all those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, Many women were also there looking from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the others were there sitting opposite the tomb. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said,
Sir, we remember what that impostor said when he has been raised from the dead. And the last deception would be worse than the first.
Pilate said to them,
You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can.
So they went with the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone.
Please be seated. Thank you. I want to thank all of our readers for the Passion Gospel. So many voices in that story. Any one of them was telling the story of Jesus from their perspective, his or her perspective. They were listening, they were watching, and they told it through their lens. That's a powerful story, and it's hard to get through. I was Jesus at 8 o'clock this morning, and I got crucified. Bob, you did a great job. You got crucified, too, at this story. It's a powerful story. And we're not allowed to go any further than the burial of Jesus today. More detail in the coming week. What we hear today is the Passion Gospel according to Matthew. We have 4 accounts of this story. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. They all tell the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. And each one tells the story with a different emphasis. Today, Matthew's gospel says that Jesus said only one thing from the gospel, Eli, 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 lema sabachthani. That was it. My God, why have you forsaken me? Nothing more in Matthew. If you go over to Mark's gospel, Jesus says exactly the same thing. If you go over to Luke's gospel, you hear the story, the first thing that Jesus says on the cross is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then there's this dialogue between the 2 criminals. One criminal who denies Jesus and wants nothing to do with him, and he dies on the cross in his sin. The other one asks to be remembered when Jesus comes to his kingdom, and Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. Over in John's gospel, Jesus does the most amount of talking from the cross. He seems to be a man in control. It is finished, Jesus says from the cross. And Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit, Jesus says from the cross. John's gospel says is the concern about Jesus' mother and the disciple whom he loved. Woman, behold your son, behold your mother. All that from John's gospel, each with a little different twist, like the lens gets focused a little differently. In Matthew's gospel, the one we read today, it simply says this, my God, why have you abandoned me? I'd like to think that Matthew, writing to his original audience, whoever they were, was thinking, there are people out there who also have felt abandoned by God. And so he, Matthew, writes to his audience, largely Jewish audience, to understand that there are times in our life when we can feel abandoned by God. Let's be honest, it's happened before to all of us. There's times when we think, God, where are you? What's going on? Why is this happening to me? Why have you abandoned me? And we're in good company, because if Jesus can say it, we can too. Yeah, there are those times when we feel abandoned. Again, Mark says the same thing. Mark has Jesus saying the same thing. Over in Luke, the dialogue about the 2 criminals. Did you notice in Matthew's account, both criminals derided Jesus? In Luke's gospel, he tells something very different. Luke's gospel, one criminal is forgiven. Today you will be with me in paradise. And then over in John's gospel, again, all this dialogue, woman, behold your son, behold your mother, I thirst. Into your hands I commend my spirit, a man totally in control of his destiny. Whereas in Matthew, he isn't. Each one of these stories, we want to know all the detail and all of how it happened. What we have, though, is the truth told through Matthew. Matthew's lens is an emphasis on abandonment. Picturing Jesus on the cross dying in abandonment. Where is God now? If there was any time when Jesus needed his father to do some talking and offer some help and words of wisdom and comfort, it would be right now. And the only thing out of Jesus' lips is, my God, why have you abandoned me? Just imagine the grief of that. But I imagine you have too. From time to time, we all have had the experience where we feel like, where is God? Why isn't God here answering my prayer? We grieve. That's honest. We're not allowed to go any further than that today in this story. We end with the burial of Jesus. We end with all these characters. Joseph of Arimathea, Pilate's wife. Did you notice that one? Barabbas. Whatever happened to Barabbas? You never hear about him after the story. What happened to Joseph of Arimathea? What happened to Nicodemus? What happened to all these characters? We want to know. We don't have all the details. What we have is the story told through a lens called Matthew. We have it told through the lens of Mark. We have it told through the lens of Luke, and we have it told through the lens of John. And you know what? They're all absolutely correct. All of them. The details may get mushy, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is the story of how it's told. Let me back up a minute. You remember 9/11? All of us of a certain age can remember where we were on 9/11. We all saw what we saw on television. But you know what? If I were to ask every one of you here today, everyone would have a different way of telling that story. You know what I mean? You know, we'd tell different details. We'd have different emphases. We may see, oh, I saw a plane, but maybe it wasn't a plane. Maybe it was a bomb. I don't know. What did I see? So we go back and we want to know the details. The thing is, we all saw the same thing, and yet we have a way of telling it through our filter. And that's what I want you to hear today. We have our filter. We have a Matthew filter, a Mark filter, a Luke filter, a John filter, and we have your filter. And we have the filter of each and every one of us who saw and just heard the story told through Matthew's filter. And what we heard was the story of Jesus' death and his words of abandonment. We don't like that word. We don't like to think that we've been abandoned. No one does. But by giving voice to this phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus has spoken for all of us who have ever wondered, where is God in this? When you and I face difficult times, when we're really hurting, when we're really suffering, and we're wondering, where is God? Where is God? We have a voice spoken on Good Friday to let us know, in the end, we've never abandoned. Amen.